Imagine this. Tonight you are playing Assassin's Creed Shadows after many months. You've got an hour to play at most, so you want to move fast. You want every minute to count. You boot up, plan your objectives, and then check your inventory to pick the best gear. It mostly helps, but sometimes it quietly trips you up. In this video, we'll explore how the game's inventory guides your choices, reflects your priorities, and occasionally slows you down. Hello there. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Yash and I am a UX designer currently working in AAA gaming. On this channel, I analyze UX in games, and in this video we are talking about Assassin's Creed Shadows. Before we dig into the nitty-gritty, let's set the lens for this analysis. The inventory isn't just a list of items. It's how the game communicates your power, progress, and gear options. So here's what we'll be looking at. Firstly, knowing how strong you are and what's coming next. Secondly, swapping, upgrading, and keeping track of what's in your arsenal. Then switching between the two playable characters, as well as managing their inventories. And lastly, making sure your character not only hits hard, but also looks cool while doing that. The inventory menu actually has 3 levels of sub-menus, each with a specific purpose. This is the main inventory screen. You get a broad overview here. Gear, stats, and your progression all at a glance. When you select a gear slot, you dive into the second sub-menu. Here you can see all the options available for that gear and start making decisions. And then most of these items let you go even deeper, customizing the visuals for individual pieces. This is where cosmetic choices come into play. So each level helps you achieve a specific goal. Let's first start by talking about the first thing you'll interact with on this menu. The first items you land onto when you open the inventory are exactly what you should notice. These are your weapons. They are the things that you would touch the most. Right below these, items from your attire are grouped together, which also makes sense. Those are the next most common things you will tweak as you progress. Next, your tools and the resource bag are visually separated from your actual gear. These are things you can use, but cannot change or swap like the other items. This distinction helps set expectations visually without the menu having to explain anything. Now, a very small nitpick here, the mount being placed in the first row feels a bit off. Personally, I don't think I've ever opened the inventory mid-session thinking, you know what, I need a different horse. So I'd probably push that tile further down. Overall, the hierarchy does exactly what it needs to do. It mirrors player behavior, and that's a big UX win. But let's also talk about what's on these tiles. Images show you what the item looks like, colors show you quality, the numbers in these diamonds show levels, and these indicate primary and secondary weapon slots. But one thing that completely threw me off was this star. The first time I saw it, I thought, did I favorite this item? I don't remember doing that. Turns out there is no favoriting system in the game. The star just means the item is customized, and I'd have never been able to guess that. They could have used a paintbrush icon or a palette icon or literally anything that's artsy enough, and this problem would have never come up. Also, sometimes a shinobi or samurai icon pops up here. I'm assuming it's meant to show whether an item belongs to Naue or Yasuke. Now these icons are absolute gold in loot boxes out in the world. One glance and it's instantly clear which character can use the item. But in this menu, I'm not sure if it's needed at all. Firstly, it doesn't always show up. Not sure if that's a bug. Second, the items are character exclusive anyway. So here it's not adding clarity, it's just adding noise. That said, this is a very minor nitpick. Overall, aside from these 2 hiccups, the content of these tiles are quite effective. But as you skim through your gear slots on the left, the menu draws your attention to the right, onto the details panel. Typically, this panel shows stats and perks for the gear in focus. Some exceptions, however, the mount doesn't have any stats, so you just get a name and a short description of the mount. And then tools and the resource pack don't have any stats either, so instead the panel shows their contents and quantities. Everything else shows some numbers and the perks. And the thing I love the most about these stats is conciseness. Obviously, Assassin's Creed is not an FPS game with 125 microscopic stats. Most weapons have 4 stats, max. The top 3 stats are constant across all melee weapons. If you switch to a ranged weapon, posture DPS cleanly swaps into headshot DPS. And then there is the 4th stat, the special effect. This is where the weapon's personality lives. Now, this is also where things get a little dicey when you start comparing weapons, but we'll come back to that later. Before that, let's talk about the stats themselves. Fewer stats is absolutely the right direction for a game like this, but fewer stats only help if you actually understand what those stats mean. And this is where things can fall apart, especially for new players. If you have played RPGs for many years, a lot of these terms may feel obvious. DPS or damage per second has been around forever. Posture, stance, these are familiar concepts if you have played certain kinds of games. But let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone coming in fresh. Without much context, it's easy to be left guessing. What does DPS mean, for example? Is it damage per second? Damage per strike? Damage per shot? Is D even damage? Similarly, what's posture DPS and how is it different from weapon DPS? And more importantly, how do these stats translate to what I'll actually feel in combat? When that connection isn't clear, new players would default to the same behavior, which is just trusting the bigger number. And everyone understands raw numbers, but named stats like these would need a bit more explanation, especially for players new to the genre or to gaming in general. Now, the game does provide some of this information in the codex, but it's not always obvious or immediate. You have to dig through these menus and you have to know exactly where to look. And this extra step means learning isn't contextual, which can break the flow for players in the moment. A simple glossary built right into the menu's contextual tutorials would make this so much easier. Did you forget what a stat or an affliction does? Just check it right here. No need to leave this menu, no need to dig through the codex, no need to break your flow. Also, one more thing here, sometimes you will see a stat highlighted like this, and you are never really told why. I'm guessing this means the stat is better than usual, maybe boosted by a perk or modified somehow, but again, I'm guessing. Anyway, so once you have wrapped your head around what these stats might mean, the next thing you'll naturally want to do is compare items. And this comparison panel is quite decent. For the most part, it shows you the information you would care about. The item name is not too important for me, but level and quality, those matter a lot, and I'm very glad they are so prominent here. But then we get to the weapon stats. Both weapons share the same 3 core stats, but the 4th stat, that's totally different. For example, this one has adrenaline gain, this one has poison buildup. So what does this mean? Does this one just not have adrenaline gain at all? Or does it have it, but poison buildup is the more prominent or special one? And that leads me to another question. What if I care more about adrenaline than poison? Or what if this weapon only has a tiny poison buildup, but this one gives me a massive adrenaline boost? Right now, the comparison doesn't tell me that. It leaves me guessing. The comparison would be far more transparent if all relevant data points were surfaced to the player, even if it means temporarily showing a 5th stat like this. And if a stat doesn't exist for a weapon, just leave a blank. This also fixes another minor problem. Sometimes a stat simply doesn't exist for a weapon, so the remaining stats don't line up neatly between the 2 panels. It's subtle, but it does slow you down as you try to follow the stat between the 2 panels to compare. Instead, keep all stats in the same order, even if one weapon has a blank slot. That way, comparing is instant. Making these changes does require a bit more space, which can be achieved by pushing these perk slots slightly further down, like so. Which is fine, because there will never be more than 2 perk slots here. Speaking of which, by the way, the game never actually tells you how many perks an item can have. The weapon quality actually guides how many perks an item can have and how much control the player has on them. The UI does show me when I have a perk or 2 equipped, and when I have an empty perk slot, I see an unequipped slot that shows this message, which by the way I have some comments on in just a minute. But there is this empty space below, which makes it look like maybe I'd unlock more perks in the future, which is definitely not true. So let's fix that. I'd always show 2 slots, regardless of how many perks an item can have. For items that can only have a single perk, the 2nd slot will be disabled. And for items that can have no perks, both slots will be disabled. This does add some visual noise to the panel, But that's a fair trade-off in favor of clarity and setting the expectations for the player. Also, going back to the empty state, right now, both the empty and equipped states are fighting for attention. The equipped perk icon is colored, but the unequipped one appears larger and has more visual detail. Even the text treatment is identical. Same color, same font weight, same emphasis, and at a glance, it's not obvious which one is active. So let's clearly separate these two states. I'd subdue the visual fluff of the empty state icon and make it dimmer and clearly inactive. I'd also reduce the prominence of this text to differentiate them further. So we talked about item stats, but there is also your base stats that you can see here. The big number inside the diamond is your current level. The fill animation in the diamond, flowing bottom to top, indicates your progression towards the next level. But the next part is interesting. What do you think this means? Is this the total XP required to reach the next level? Or is this the remaining XP you still need to earn in order to level up? There is a difference. One is a raw target value. The other is the delta between your current and target XPs. The way it is presented makes you think it is the raw number, but it indeed is the delta, meaning you still need to earn this much XP to level up. To be fair, this is rather minor and eventually as you play more it gets clearer, but it did take some thinking and I feel like it can be made a lot clearer. A simple copy change like this would completely remove the ambiguity. A tiny change, but one that can go a long way in communicating the idea more clearly. Next, I have some stats with icons that I had a hard time understanding. I can safely assume the first one is my health, but the other two, those are a lot less clear. The last one looks like damage you can deal, mainly because I've seen similar icons elsewhere in the game, but I honestly can't say that with confidence. I'm also not sure how it is calculated. I used to think this was an average of both your equipped weapons' damages, but the math doesn't line up. So clearly that assumption is wrong. And the small diamond in the middle is especially interesting. For the longest time, I had no idea what it was. I used to think it might be related to level progression since the game already uses diamonds to indicate that. But then I kept asking myself, why does it need to be in my base stats? It is only later that I found out that adrenaline, which is another system in the franchise, is also indicated with diamonds in this game. And active abilities, which is another game system, best seen in the mastery menu in the HUD, that one uses diamonds as well. Adrenaline and active abilities are definitely related, so it does make sense for both of them to use the same shape, but your level progression is not directly related to either of those systems. So I wish they used a different shape to indicate level progression. So overall, understanding these stats required a lot of guesswork and prior knowledge, which negatively impacts my understanding of my power and progression. I wish the game explained these things better, ideally within the same menu, without forcing players to jump into the codex or any other external explanations. But anyway, moving on, so once you understand all your stats, the next thing you'd naturally want to do is to act on that information, which brings us to how you equip items. First, you select a gear slot from this menu. Doing that would open the item selection menu for that specific slot, where you can choose what to equip. You can find the most fitting item at any given time based on the information you are provided in the item grid. You clearly see that an item with a higher number and a better color would surely be better. Even without deep system knowledge, this works well for both new and experienced players. That said, there is a small clarity gap with the hierarchy of item qualities. For example, is purple better than gold? Is blue worse than green? There is no easy way to tell. There is a codex entry that lets you infer this information based on the order they have mentioned these qualities, but relying on memory or external menus for something this fundamental feels like an unwanted friction. It doesn't need to be too pronounced. For example, something like this can help me understand it quickly without adding too much noise. Just a simple, subtle reminder can help reinforce this concept better and avoid players from forgetting it. But more importantly, there is another thing about the weapon selection menu that I find very annoying. You see, any game with a lot of loot must make it easy to track newly acquired items. The game does this by showing you these breadcrumbs on new items, not only in the inventory menu, but when you unlock new objectives, new skills, or new codex entries, basically anywhere you acquire something new. The system works exactly as expected for most gear. You acquire a new item, you see a breadcrumb on the gear slot here, you open that slot, and the new item is clearly marked in that list. But for weapons, this is slightly different. Watch what happens when you get a new weapon. You do see a breadcrumb on the weapon slot, well, both the weapon slots. You then press the slot and open the menu, where you don't see it anymore. Your next logical move is to cycle through the other weapon classes through these tabs. But wait, we don't see anything new here. Did you spot any breadcrumbs here? I didn't. Well, let's go back in time a few seconds and allow me to show you what just happened. As you see, the breadcrumb was indeed present, but it disappeared the moment we focused on it while navigating these tabs. The result? You don't know which weapon was new, you don't even know which class it belonged to, and the system has effectively failed its primary job. To fix this, I can think of two things. The breadcrumb firstly needs a short buffer period, so it doesn't vanish instantly upon focus, but rather after a brief moment longer. The exact focus duration can be tuned through testing to find a sweet spot. Secondly, it would be nicer if the breadcrumb was also displayed in these tabs, so you know instantly which category contains something new. The space is tight, yes, but something like this could work, possibly. Apart from this, I also have a minor nitpick about something specific. As you might be able to tell, both the weapon slots land you to the same list of weapons. And if you navigate to your secondary weapon from your primary slot, you won't be able to equip it. Which makes sense because it's obviously meaningless to equip the same weapon in both your slots, but the error message you see here makes no sense. Equipping it is obviously restricted because it is equipped in the other slot. So instead, it can simply say this. Even better, if instead of simply blocking me, why not just let me swap the weapons between the two slots? In which case, this button would say swap, and you don't want this to happen by mistake, so a hold interaction or a confirmation pop-up can be added to ensure this is deliberate. This lets players experiment with playstyles quickly without forcing them to go through the entire unequipped, re-equipped flow. That said, this obviously is an edge case and that's why a nitpick. So overall, item selection is actually very well done. It just stumbles in a few key moments, but otherwise it's mostly fine. But this was item selection at a granular level. Something that piques my interest also is this. They've used the word loadout alongside a number twice. Does that mean I can have sets of gear that I can quickly switch between? If that's true, that would be really nice. It would add another layer of complexity to item selection and build management, but that's a really nice feature. The problem is, I don't know if multiple loadouts are possible at all. And if they are, how and when do I unlock it? And then how can I create a loadout? And the game doesn't tell me how to do that either. No codex entry, nothing about this in the contextual tutorials, no hint, no tooltip, or any other affordance that provides this information. The game should explain that up front. Even better, if the feature is not usable yet, then honestly it should just completely hide the word loadout for now. Because right now it communicates possibility without clarity, and that's where confusion creeps in. That said, you can not only view but also edit the gear of both the characters without switching between them. This is a big UX win, especially as you progress as one character, but you keep finding items meant for the other. Being able to quickly check their inventory, see how strong they would be, and even pre-optimize their gear, all without switching characters, that's thoughtful, and it respects the player's time. Also, there is a nice subtle detail here. By default, your current character would be the one focused in the center. Navigating to the other character's loadout would switch the focus to them. You can even rotate and visualize them here, and even get visual updates as you change their gear. And once again, I'm very glad I don't have to change characters to be able to do this. I do wish the secondary character's preview became larger when changing gear. Right now, the model is a bit too small to clearly see any visual changes, but I realized this would also introduce new problems. You'd need a stronger indicator for which character is currently equipped, and solving that would likely require reworking multiple parts of the UI. So yeah, small impact, high effort, just a thought. The current system works fine and it doesn't hurt the overall UX. But that brings me to the biggest gripes I have with handling dual characters. When you unlock Yasuke, you see this button at the bottom of this menu. Holding it lets you switch between characters. They had a similar system also in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, like so. And this is one of the 3 methods to switch characters. The other 2 being selecting the character in the world map when fast traveling and interacting with them in the hideout, which is your base of operations. One of the more common critiques I've heard about this game is how the whole character switching system is very menu driven, and I completely agree. This mechanic needed to be a bit more fluid and seamless and a bit more alive. GTA 5, for example, is a great reference here. You can switch characters directly while playing, and the transition itself becomes part of the experience. Now, to be fair, something like this is not easy. There can be many technical constraints around this. But even then, this is Ubisoft. If anyone could have pulled off something more ambitious here, it is them. Other than that, I have some thoughts regarding how the button behaves. The button always looks active, even when switching is not possible. This makes it really hard to tell when you can switch and when you can't. The codex does have an entry explaining how this works, but ideally the menu should have reflected this. I appreciate that they have the codex, but as a player, you wouldn't want to keep going back to the game's official instruction manual for every little thing like this. Currently, if switching is not possible, you would see this error after you hold the button. The whole interaction itself is very good. It avoids accidental switches, but it also makes this more frustrating than it needs to be. You commit to the full hold and then the game tells you, nope, can't do it. The fix here is simple. Don't remove the hold interaction, obviously. Just add a proper disabled state to this button. That alone would instantly communicate that I can't switch and save me the unnecessary wait every time. Also, a very small nitpick here. The button switches you to this character who is always positioned over here, but the button's position associates it more to this character. For experienced player, this probably won't even register. But for newer players, this can cause real hesitation. So maybe hot take here, but I'd much rather align this button towards the right, closer to this character. Yes, it would break symmetry, but I think that's okay. I also don't think it needs to stand out more than the other prompts because character switching is not the primary action of this menu. Now, I do have some more thoughts on the rest of the controller prompts, but let's park that for now because there is one more major piece of this inventory experience that we still need to talk about. Quickly recapping, the customization experience lives at the deepest level of this menu hierarchy. These let you change the appearance of your gear to another item that you already own, while the mount has a saddle customization. Overall, I do like this feature and I appreciate they took the effort to work on something like this. It's purely cosmetic, but it meaningfully improves my experience. The biggest win for me is clothing. A lot of times, the best armor I acquire just looks bad. So I just change the model and this way I can keep the better stats of the new item while looking at the gear I like. With weapons, they go one step further. You can customize individual weapon parts. I personally don't use this much, but it's still a nice layer for players who care about weapon aesthetics and identity at such a deep level. The only major gripe I have with this menu is the lack of clarity about one thing. Not every unlocked item model is available for customization across the board. For example, this item only has these models available, but this one has a few more, and I don't understand why. I'm fine with restrictions, I just want the game to tell me what the rules are. Right now it feels random and that's never a great feeling in customization systems. Also, I wish the item grid here was a bit wider. In other menus, a narrow grid makes sense. You do need space for item details and the preview. But here, there are no item details. So there is no real reason the grid cannot breathe. The back submenu already proves that this works. Wider grid, less scrolling, faster scanning. Same approach would have fit perfectly over here. But to be clear, this is a nitpick. Nothing here actively hurts the player experience. And that brings me to something I parked earlier. Overall, these are really well done. I can usually find what I need across all 3 submenu levels. So here on out, this is mostly just me nitpicking. In item selection menus, this button trips me constantly. Pressing R3 opens the comparison panel, while you can press this button to visualize the item like so. You can also use the right stick to rotate the character model. But now here's the problem. I mentally associate the right stick with visual interaction. So my brain keeps telling me, press the stick to visualize. And I do this over and over and over again. Most likely, this is a me problem. But the fact that it never went away after dozens of hours tells me something. Personally, I'd flip these bindings so I can press this button to compare and press the right stick to visualize. Comparison is the higher frequency action anyway, at least for me. And pressing the stick for something you do all the time just doesn't feel very good. At the very least, I wish the game would let me remap some of these menu controls. Right now, you can customize some bindings such as combat and HUD, but you cannot change any of the menu interactions, and that's very limiting. Also, we can perhaps move the rotate button towards the center. This can work really well alongside the visualize button, especially if the visualize action is assigned to the right stick. This can create 3 clear zones: general navigation on the left, item specific actions on the right, and preview specific prompts in the middle. The only odd ones out would be these prompts in customization menus because these are item specific. So either these can be moved to the right for consistency or they remain here as is and we just live with that. But other than that, I think this change can work fairly well. Overall, the inventory menu mostly gets it right. It helps you understand your power, manage gear and switch between characters, all without too much friction. But as you saw, it's not perfect. There are moments where clarity and speed can break down, showing you that even the smallest UX choices can shape your play experience so profoundly. Good UX is not just about functionality, it's also about how the experience feels while you are in the flow of the game. And that's a wrap, guys. If you enjoyed this deep dive into game UX, hit that like button, subscribe for more insights, and let me know in the comments. What's one game inventory menu that you either loved or loved to hate? Anyway, that's my time. Thanks for watching.